This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 29th of June, 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm Tom.
And I am DM. Let's take a look at today's headlines. On the Daily Nation, finally, end of virus lockdown is in sight.
Amen.
The Standard, Ryla scoops Ruto's plum house slots. And in the Star, ailing Mzee Kibaki, 88, at City Hospital.
Yes.
Where shall we begin? With the seemingly good news, perhaps?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Lockdown is in sight.
Yes.
Wow.
As we know, the president will be addressing the country again on the 6th of July 2020. Which is just 7 days away. And according to the Daily Nation, it looks like he is set up to open the country.
Yeah.
And they're basing this prediction on Dr. Patrick Amoth's statement yesterday, the COVID-19 update. He's the Health Acting Director General. And he said that the country has met most of the parameters that had been laid down as a condition for preparedness in order that the country may be opened up. Now, you remember from the president's speech which he delivered at the Governors Summit, and he said that opening the country is predicated upon preparedness, and he gave and he reiterated the two conditions that had been given in the third summit, which was held barely 15 days before that. One was that the counties would need to have COVID-19 units in the hospitals.
Yeah, 300 ICU beds.
300 ICU beds in the COVID units. And the other one is what the Ministry of Health had, conditions that the Ministry of Health had given the counties. There were, I think there were 7 irreducible minimums that the counties had to meet in order for the country to be opened up.
Right.
I don't know. The headline itself is very well crafted. We are happy to see this kind of headlines. But I will say, though, that it may be speculative because it is just based on the optimism of one man.
Yeah.
We have a 3-part criteria that we use to analyze the headlines for you. We ask, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And finally, is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
Yeah.
I think it's a good headline. I think it's a good story. If we remember, the president said, he said it's this 42+1 agreement, right? That if all the governors agree that they are ready and they're willing to open, that he will not stand in their way. I think if they're moving towards that, for me, this headline is a progress report.
I think we should open up. I mean, how long will you keep people indoors? Plus, look, other countries are also opening up. The UK is opening up, pole. Tanzania, our very strange friends, are also opening up. Say children are going to school without masks. I think what we should be looking for right now... I don't think
we should use Tanzania as a baseline for anything.
What we should be looking for right now is a vaccine or treatment that can be able to mitigate this thing.
But I do laud the government's decision to base it on preparedness and for being very systematic about the preparedness and for sharing this function with the county governments. That is the national and county governments that will take us in that direction. Finally, the Standard. I don't know if the editor of the Standard read this headline aloud to himself or herself.
Tuan, please read it for us.
I think he was asleep. Raila scoops Ruto's plum house slots.
That's
a mouthful.
Shortcut.
That's why went staccato. Anyway, it's telling us that 4 ODM senators are slated to assume chairmanship of Senate committees. Moses Kajwang, Mohamed Faki from Mombasa, Naomi Shionga, and Okongo Mogeni. Will share devolution, intergovernment relations, blah, 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 blah. Now, of course, that's what will happen because you see, if you see this collaboration agreement between Uhuru Kenyatta and other constituent parties, other parties, Wiper, ODM, ANC, I mean Ford Kenya and all that, it is because he intends to do something within both houses, within the National Assembly and Senate, and it could be either 2 things. First is either impeachment of William Ruto, or the passing of BBI. We spoke about the conditions last week. They either choose to do parliamentary initiative or popular initiative. They might have to go to the wards. They do their 25%, assuming
county,
in 24 counties. That is very easy. Then it goes to parliament, then it goes to Senate, and voila, we have a referendum. But the other thing is this as well. Now, if you're going to do an asset audit on Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. There's that one who has gained, there's that one who has lost. The reason I'm saying this is because of this. If you see Ruto has gained such, has lost such strength in Parliament and in Senate, and Uhuru has gained it. And if you see this happening, it's because William Ruto just refused to toe the line. And for all these things that are happening in both houses, he's the biggest loser.
I want to play devil's advocate and just ask the question, how could this go wrong? Is there a way in which this could go wrong? Yes. I think that the handshake primarily is a relationship based on trust. You know, each party is trusting that the other is going to follow up with this agreement, whatever was decided, you know, behind closed doors. And I think with Uhuru putting a lot of ODM people in leadership, he's again trusting that putting them in there will be to his benefit. To
his benefit in the end.
But what if one day Raila wakes up and he says, you know, this handshake story,
it's not working for me.
It's not working for me, I'm over it. What do we do?
I think we just have to assume that there are some agreements and incentives that are not in the public domain that have happened behind closed doors. But then also we have to also assume that these people as political animals have made their calculations based on solid factors, such as supporting an incumbent usually yields good results. So we make those assumptions.
I love the calculations part you've said, because it's a game of probabilities. Uhuru Kenyatta has reduced the probabilities that this could go wrong, right? The only thing that can affect this is probably an act of God, which is a possibility.
An act of God. Anyway, as we said last week, if you do not toe the party line, you don't expect the party leader to give you a lollipop. And especially in this case, the lollipops have been taken away. Leadership in parliamentary committees are lucrative. They give you leverage and influence. And of course, we are seeing that changing now for the group aligned to William Ruto. The Star.
In the Star, we have Aileen Mzee-Kibaki, 88 at City Hospital. Very sad headline. I think we all woke up to the news that he was in hospital. However, the Star gives us the story that there are two conflicting reports as to why he's in hospital. One is that he's going for a routine medical checkup, and the other is that he's undergoing management of severe pain as a result of infection. I think if we go back to 2002, we all know that he was in that terrible car accident, and that kind of has then led to lots of other operations and treatments that he has had to undergo. 2016 in South Africa, he went to London. So yeah, I don't know if there's much to say about this story. Of course, we wish him the best of health. They also recount how he has maintained a very low profile since exiting power in 2013. And most recently, we saw him at the public body viewing for deceased President Arap Moi. So we
wish him all the best.
Of course. I don't know, I guess the only silver lining, I don't know if there even is one, I appreciate that he went to a local hospital. Right? I think there's something to be applauded for that. We know a lot of our leaders like to jet off to unknown locations. So,
absolutely. We wish him a quick recovery.
Yes.
And so which I think the Daily Nation gives us our...
I'll go to the Daily Nation.
Top the Standard, the editor was asleep at the wheel.
Out of respect for our former president, we will not toss the Star.
Absolutely.
Yes. And on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Just like the headlines, we have a three-part criteria that we use to analyze them for you. We ask, is the cartoon humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And finally, is the cartoon effective or just plain lazy?
Man, Iga, this is a horrid cartoon. Anyway, it's a drawing of a Kenyan lady, and she's been labeled recovery, and she's carrying a kiondo. And there's a person there who has hands and is putting a stimulus package in her kiondo, and the person giving her stimulus package is called soaring debts.
Is the person giving or taking away the money?
Is it taking away?
Yeah, so economic recovery is putting pennies into the basket, while soaring debts is taking out large chunks of 1,000 shilling notes.
Didn't we get a moratorium to him? Well, we didn't, because we're an upper middle income country.
It depends. If you're borrowing from the Bretton Woods, you probably get a moratorium. From the Chinese,
we're yet to know. They suggested that they may, but we're
yet to know.
It's too early to tell.
Either way, this is a rubbish cartoon. Honestly.
And it's quite pessimistic.
Pessimistic.
Yeah.
In the Standard, we have Kaso, and he has drawn Anne Waiguru, I suppose. And then behind her are 11 dwarfs.
Yes.
And it says Snow White and the 11 senators. So we know that because there are 11, they're members of the committee that was constituted to determine her impeachment case. And the mouse there at the bottom is saying, Mope Kama Pamba. Tuje, this means as white as
cotton wool. I knew exactly what that meant, my dear. Don't test me. You think you can catch me off guard on a Monday?
I suppose Kaso is drawing from the fairy tale or folk tale, a Western one called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And here, Waiguru is the Snow White. And the 11 dwarfs, I guess, who loved her in the fairy tale and pandered to her.
Took care of her, protected
and did not substantiate her impeachment motion. That's what they did.
Which is so funny because I think most people watching those impeachment proceedings, it looked like a done deal. Those were such damning, accusations made against her. And then, a few days pass and it was overnight.
And it is what it is.
Anne Waiguru should thank her gods, going through processes, 2 impeachment processes, and she gets out untouched.
How many lives does this woman have?
She should thank her political
godfather.
Yeah. She should thank her political godfathers.
Good for her. So in the Star, we have the new president of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, and he's sitting on a high chair, the Malawi high chair, which is the presidency. Behind him is a box written rerun, and then behind him is a court gavel annulment, and then further behind is election. In fact, the trajectory is from the other side. There was an election, then it was annulled. The election was, the first election was won by Peter Mutharika, and then it was contested, it was taken to the Supreme Court, and it was annulled. So it's the second one in Africa to annul. And then they went into a rerun, and Lazarus Chakwera, who was in the opposition, won against the incumbent. And there on the side is a very puzzled Raila, wondering how did he do it? Teach me your ways. So in the cartoon says Chakwera steps up to the challenge. We know that Raila is unwell now, so we hope that he recovers really soon so that he can go on a benchmarking tour in Malawi to find out
lessons learned
on how to sit on the high chair. Which cartoon do we like? I quite liked that one.
I like Ozone. I like Ozone.
What I appreciated in this Ozone cartoon is, putting together the Malawi story, but, with Raila and knowing his backstory of several failed elections. I thought it was
very clever.
Very clever.
So the Star gives us our winning cartoon.
Fantastic.
So what is our final thought?
Now, our final thought, it is inspired by a book entitled The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity by Douglas Murray.
So in this book, the author asks a question. How did our societies become so insane? And in this book, The Madness of Crowds, he argues that it is because highly intelligent people have clinged onto this new religion known as social justice, identity politics, or intersectionality. And he says that this happens whereby meaning is realized through fights between people who commit wrong think or express things that are politically incorrect. And so in this book he identifies the 4 most common oppressed identities that have been weaponized to have these fights. And he says a lot of the time this happens against what he calls the white patriarchy. And he says he writes a chapter on each of these ideas. So the headings are gay, women, race, and trans. And so the madness in this title points to the way in which ideas have been weaponized. And he says he gives lots of these cases of incident after incident where people have been fired, made to quit, or they have to beg for forgiveness just for saying the wrong thing. And I think across the internet we know this as cancel culture, where you're cancelled for saying something wrong. And so he became really fascinated by these themes, and he has published quite a few books kind of trying to understand this idea. And he says, he describes it as this tendency to rush to join in with the mob, regardless of where the mob is going, whatever direction they're headed in. And so in his last book, entitled The Strange Death of Europe, he gives this really harsh indictment on multiculturalism and the consequences of mass Muslim migration to Europe. He sounds like a very controversial and problematic person. But at the time, he says that Western values were in decline. And funnily enough, this book becomes a bestseller. Because at the time, you have this refugee crisis happening in 2015 in Europe. And you have this herd-like behavior, he says, of politicians and journalists who are favoring mass movement of Muslims into Europe. And so now in this book, he follows this crowd as they fixate on these rights or perceived oppression of ethnic and sexual minorities. And also the relationship between men and women. And so he focuses on this culture, as I said, of social justice, identity politics, and how these new things of, people having grievances and screaming about oppression are driven by social media, and often they originated from the corners of academia. So there were these fringe ideas that were written in papers in the late 80s that eventually came into the forefront in the early 2000s. And he says that they destroy liberal thought and they become very dangerous and divisive. You create this intense tribalism where if you do not agree with my tribe, we cannot, be in the same space. And so he says that people are shouting and screaming that things have never been worse in the history of time. They've never been worse for minorities and women, and that we have to fight in order to achieve social justice. But then he talks about how we end up having these culture wars, this deep divide between progressives and conservatives, and how this is now reshaping politics and economics. And he says, unfortunately, the consequence then becomes, with this social justice movement, that people end up using aggressive tactics to really stand in firm with what they believe in. So I will admit that he does not give any resolutions or answers in this book. He rather just gives a lot of questions and allows the reader to think and come up with whatever solution they think may be fit. But he ends with this call for free speech, because he says this cancel culture has really killed the desire or the ability for people to have free speech, shared common values, or sanity in an age of mass media. I think it's very interesting in this time of political incorrectness, cancel culture, the internet.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. That's true.
I love it. I focused on the chapter on forgiveness. Now he tells a story. In August 2018, a company called Lilly Diabetes, it's a pharmaceutical company, I believe they manufacture insulin. They announced that they were withdrawing the sponsorship of a NASCAR race car driver, a guy called Conor Daly, the guy just 26 years old, just before he was about to make his debut. You see, what had Conor what had he done wrong? And the guy had done absolutely nothing. But the sponsors uncovered a story from the 1980s, before even Conor was born, that his dad, in a radio interview then, he called African Americans a derogatory term. He did not say which one. Now, father comes out, he says, I'm so sorry. He expresses regret at that incident. He says that was that time and all that. But you know what? Lilly went ahead and cancelled Conor's sponsorship.
Because of what his father said.
Because yes, now this guy was his sponsorship was withdrawn because of his father's sins. Now his point here is, why punish this young lad for his father's sins? Now he says that humankind has created an environment in which forgiveness has become impossible, and I agree. And he says there are two ways to get out of this unforgiving conundrum, but those two ways are very weak. The first is us people, we like to forgive people that we like, or people that look exactly like us. For a certain reason, forgiveness is easier. But the second reason is the way we deal with this is we are forced to conform. Now he tells a story of a man called Lewis Hamilton. One day this guy is playing with his the F1 driver. This guy is playing with his nephew. But then he goes live on his phone and he says, I'm having the worst day of my life. And he pans all the way to his nephew, and there is his nephew. Guess what he's dressed in? In a purple and pink dress, and he's enjoying life. Now, Hamilton expresses his disappointment at his nephew dressed in purple, and first it's a dress, and then second it's purple and pink. But then the social media hits out at Lewis Hamilton, says, oh, you are body shaming your nephew. What you've said is homophobic. So for a full year, they bash Lewis Hamilton. Now, this guy is forced out to conform. Now, in a GQ, GQ is a magazine, I believe. He comes out and he's there on the poster, on the front page, and the guy is dressed in a dress. And the title of that GQ cover, it is, I want to make amends. Now, Lewis Hamilton was forced out to come and apologize for his own opinion, for goodness sake. And I think what Murray is trying to tell us is, everybody, every human being should feel very comfortable in expressing their opinions. And the age of political correctness is very dangerous, because you're forcing people to take up things which they themselves don't wish to, to take up. So please, and I would say this, I personally say very crazy things here. I know maybe in 10, 15 years.
Are you making an appeal for people to not cancel you?
No, they can do whatever they want. But I think it's very important to express what you feel, more so intelligently, but please always express what you feel.
I agree and disagree. First of all, especially when he's talking about forgiveness and how the world has become an unforgiving place, two things. One, he takes very extreme examples, like the example of the child who lost sponsorship because of what his father said. That is extreme, and that is not right.
Precisely.
But that is not indicative of what is happening with cancel culture, because people are being called out for being racist or for oppressing people. And I think that is fair enough, because how people are punished now also serves as a deterrent in the future.
That's true.
People right now know that I cannot be openly racist. Be racist in your house, but don't go and oppress other people, because you know that it's going to affect you. And it's going to affect you in very tangible ways. You're going to lose your job, or you're going to lose your sponsorship, or you're just going to face general ostracization.
Absolutely.
And I think that is a safety net for this kind of situation, for this kind of problem that is very entrenched. When I started reading this book, I was ready to be very angry at the author and to rubbish and debunk it immediately, because first of all, he's neoconservatist, and we know from his other book that he has very radical ideas,
anti-Islamic
ideas and ideas about race that are very problematic and questionable. But we should always, and here on the Media Police Post, we read books that we don't agree with, but we should read them in order to understand what it is other perspectives are.
Absolutely.
And there's something actually that refers to that in this book called splitting. And splitting is when the self is unable to deal with the good and bad qualities within us simultaneously. So what we do is that we subconsciously split the bad and attribute it to other people. And what happens then is that we have a very exaggerated sense of personal virtue and righteousness. But then we also, in the same kind of exaggeration, we do the attribution of, the negative attribution of selfishness and corruption to other people. So we as the readers are also guilty of that, and I was when I was reading this book. But also him as the writer is very guilty of that, because he's made his conservative projections on other people, and unfortunately the other people that he has made the projections on are entire groups of people, are women, are minorities or liberal intellectuals, and so on. So one thing that stood out for me is that he has the notion or the idea that in the 21st century that we are living in right now, we have made so much progress and social strides, especially to people who were previously marginalized, like women, like people of color. And he says that women and minorities, black people, have more opportunities than they have ever had in our history, and they have more freedoms than they have ever experienced in our history. And so activism for further freedoms by those groups of people do not serve to progress humanity further. They only serve to be divisive and to bring about or to breed hate. In doing this, obviously, he's dismissing and trivializing other people's life experiences just because he's not experiencing it himself. We know from experience and from evidence and from even what is happening right now that racism, for instance, is real. There is evidence that it doesn't only happen at the individual level where people experience it day to day, like a lot of black people have, or a lot of people of minority have, but it's also systemic. It's also very ingrained in structures. Even countries have experienced collective racism. So in doing that, of course, he's projecting his own biases. However, I feel that it is right for me to say what I agree with him on, which is what you have mentioned. I do agree that we are entering an age of chronic political correctness, and the result of that, of course, is that we tend to, or we collectively villainize people who don't have the same views as we do, or who don't have the same world viewpoints. In the book, he gives the example of how far we have gone in terms of political correctness. We have gone on the other extreme. And I'll leave our viewers with this experiment. Go on to Google Images and Google white inventors and click on images and see what you get there. So Google itself is afraid of being politically incorrect. On a day where we had a winning headline from the Daily Nation and a winning cartoon from, was it The Star? From The Star. I'll leave you with this, and I know 2M will like this quote. The best person to be is who you are. So resist any other viewpoints that tell you otherwise. Thank you for joining us tonight. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also on your TV screens on Pang Free to Air, Star Times, and GOVT. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.
Yes.